Now, there have been a fair number of free market economists around, predicted this would happen, and yet, do we look to them for advice? No, we totally exclude them. We don't listen to them. We don't look at them. We look to the people who created the problem and then perpetuate the problem. The most serious mistake that could be made here today is to blame free market capitalism for this problem. This has nothing to do with free market capitalism. This has to do with a managed economy, an inflationary system, corporatism, a special interest system. It has nothing to do with the failure of free markets and capitalism. Yet we're resorting now, once again, to promoting more and more government. Long term, this is disastrous because everything we're doing here, everything we've done for 6 months, we've already pumped in $700 billion. Here's another $700 billion. This is going to destroy the dollar. That's what you should be concerned about. Yeah, Wall Street's in trouble. There's a lot of problems. And if we don't vote for this, there's going to be problems. But believe me, if you destroy the dollar, you're going to destroy a worldwide economy, and that's what we're on the verge of doing. And it is inevitable, if we continue this, that's what's going to happen. It's going to be a lot more serious than what we're dealing with today. We need to get our house in order. We need more oversight. That is for certainty. But we need oversight of the Federal Reserve System, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, the President's Working Group on Financial Markets. Find out what they're doing. How much have I been meddling in the market? But what we're doing today is going to make things much worse.
And you did allude to the fact that dislocations and credit creations are a problem and can add fuel to this fire. But at times, I don't think you follow those rules very well. I mean, even though you recognize that's the case, because I think understanding the Depression is one of our problems, or the lack of understanding of the Depression, because generally most of what people are taught these days is that it was a lack of credit in the 30s that caused the prolongation of the Depression. They never talk about the excessive credit and the misallocation and the malinvestment of the 20s that precipitated the bubble that had to be corrected. And then in the Depression, what did we try to do? We tried to fix prices, which is exactly what we're doing now. We would not, in the Depression, allow wages to go down, and we said, well, the price of farm products has to stay up. So in doing that, we plowed crops under, and people were starving. And I don't think we've gained a whole lot of wisdom since we were plowing under crops to keep prices up. Because now we're talking about illiquid assets. And we're talking about price fixing. And we're talking about somebody in the government, in the Federal Reserve and Treasury, who does prices. Now, the Austrian School of Economics, which has been around a long time, they predicted the Depression, they predicted the 1970s, the breakdown of Bretton Woods, they predicted all that's happening today. Their key point is, don't mess around with prices. Because if you do, you become socialistic. And this is why Mises predicted the failure of socialism and why it did fail. But here we are in price fixing again. You say that part of your mandate is price stability, but I hardly think price stability comes by price fixing. But the idea of you taking an illiquid asset, for the most part, most illiquid assets are illiquid because they're not worth anything. And if somebody has a house that they bought for $4 million, it goes up to $5 million, he wants to sell and nobody buys it, that's really not an illiquid asset. If he takes it down to 1, he might sell it. But people aren't smart enough. The Federal Reserve's not smart enough. Treasury's not smart enough. Congress is not smart enough to know what prices are. So I think that is the greatest danger of what we're doing here is we're price fixing, and that is what I'm convinced that prolonged the Depression in the 1930s because we got into that. And this whole idea of credit creation, we've already created $700 billion worth of credit because of the interference and the involvement in the markets rating. And here we're coming along with another $700 billion. The real question is, where does it come from? And we're surely not going to tax the economy $700 billion. No way would even consider this. But are we going to borrow it? Well, we could go to our bankers, our friends in China. They might come up with $700 billion and loan it to us, but I doubt it. But where are they going to come? They're going to come to you. They're going to come to you to create credit. But I don't even know where you get the authority to create credit out of thin air. There's certainly no authority in the Constitution for you to have endless authority to create money and credit out of thin air, which is a basic problem that we have. This is why we're here today is that we haven't understood that. And all the blame is put on the fact that there is a downturn in housing. Well, that means they were overpriced. So all our efforts right now is to keep the prices up. But the prices should come down. That's what the market is saying. But to fix prices at a higher level than they should be, I think just compounds our problem. But
Wall Street today, the Fed pumped in over $600 billion worth of credit into the markets without congressional approval. They had already pumped in over $700 billion. But this was another $700 billion of appropriation. So what's going to go broke is the dollar, and that's what we have to be concerned about. So I argued the case on the floor before the vote that voting for this money would really weaken the dollar. But believe me, by not voting for it, the dollar's still going to get much weaker because the Federal Reserve is capable of increasing money and credit at will. The spending has never stopped. The market and the dollar will eventually fall apart because of the way we spend, the way we borrow, the way we inflate, and that is the problem. Government is too big. It is said that we're in a liquidity crisis and a credit crunch, and all we need is more credit. The Federal Reserve has already injected over $1 trillion worth of credit, and it hasn't seemed to help a whole lot. Injecting another $600 or $700 billion will not solve the problem. I think one of the reasons why we're floundering around here is that we don't understand the problem, because instead of it being a credit crunch, I think it's a lot more serious than that. And that is, I think what's happening in the market today is signaling something much more draconian, because it's probably telling us that our government is insolvent, that we're on the verge of bankruptcy, and big things are starting to happen, and we don't quite understand it, so we fall back on the old cliches. What we need is more appropriations, more spending, more debt, and more credit in the market. That means more inflation by the Federal Reserve System. And yet, that is what caused the trouble. We want to do this, it is said, to prevent the recession or depression, because that is unbearable. But the truth is you should have thought of that about 10 or 15 years ago, because the financial bubble created by the excess of credit and the lowering of the interest rates is the cause of the recession. The recession is a demand. It's a must. You can't avoid it. Yes, it's been papered over several times over these last several decades, but that just made the bubble bigger. But the message now is you can't paper it over any longer. So the recession and or depression will come. My sincere conviction is that by doing more mischief and not allowing markets to adjust, debt to be liquidated, you're going to guarantee a depression. It's going to be prolonged. The agony is going to be there for a lot longer than if you allow markets to adjust. Liquidation of debt. Let the bankruptcy occur. Let the good assets come up and let it react. This idea that there's not enough regulation is completely wrong. There's too much regulation and lack of regulation of the Federal Reserve System and the Exchange of Stabilization Fund.
Another vote on the bailout bill, but this time the bill was much worse. You know, it's pretty amazing. You take a very, very bad bill, appropriating $700 billion, and you can't get enough vote to pass it, so you take it back out. You make it much worse. You take it up to over $800 billion, and 57 people, most of them conservatives, switched their votes. So that tells you a little bit about what's happening here in Washington. And the one very bad part of this bill was the fact that the tax portion was written by the Senate, and under the Constitution, only the House can originate tax bills. So that in itself was unconstitutional. What we're really dealing with now is the actual bankruptcy of this country. And we can look around for some good things that could come from this, and one is that we will be forced to live within our means, and we won't be able to live on the credit card. And we are in a somewhat similar situation as the Soviets were in 1989 when the Soviet Empire came down, but it came down for economic reasons. But this whole idea that you can loosen up credit and solve the problem by doing the very things that cause the trouble, that is, spend too much, run up too much deficits, monetize the debt, which means more inflation and more regulation.
Not dealing with the fact that this country is bankrupt. And we're on the verge of some really major events, but we're adding fire to the fuel there. We're just dumping kerosene on it and making this problem that much worse. If debt is a problem, just think of what we've just done today. We have ballooned the debt like never before.